April 20th, 1991, Los Angeles to Lima. The day of departure was at daybreak. I took an express bus to Fukuoka International Airport, a shuttle to Tokyo Haneda Airport, and a limousine bus to reach Narita International Airport. It was a hell of a tour in half a day already. The journey from Haneda to Narita was confusing due to unfamiliarity. At 26 years of age, I had never flown to Tokyo or used a limousine bus to Narita before this. My brain was overwhelmed with figuring out where to go, staying focused, and keeping to my schedule. I was drained when I arrived at Narita. Everything was so different from Fukuoka. No lush greenery. The sky was gray instead of the beautiful clear blue sky. Heaven felt so low. The entrance hall was vast and spacious. A super high ceiling with big glass windows in a futuristic style amazed me. Walking around the shopping complex attached to the entrance made me feel weird until the meeting. I felt like Alice in Wonderland. In a different city, everything seemed natural but somehow looked unreal, like in a dream, sleeping but awake, wandering around with a sense of strangeness. The time had come to be at the designated meeting spot. I had never met or talked to the tour conductor by phone, but many people were already gathering around him. The tour participants numbered 36, most of whom were women in their mid-30s. There were only 8 men, the tour conductor and me. I didn't know anybody. I had never met them before, never talked to them. Boarding in these circumstances always makes me anxious, reserved, and quiet, almost invisible. Soon after, the tour conductor started assisting members with checking in. Until then, all of this was virtually happening in my head because everything was done by facsimile. I felt mixed emotions and feelings, almost like I was in a weird zone. Part of me was there, and part of me wasn't there, but someplace else. Then suddenly, everything seemed to snap back to reality. This was happening. The group led the way to the departure gate, and I automatically followed them. In this instantly gathered tour group of total strangers, I realized I would leave Japan today, fly to America, stay a night at the Los Angeles airport, and go to Peru via Miami the next day. Our first destination was San Jose, where we would transit for a few hours and then fly to Los Angeles. When I found my seat, a Japanese lady was already sitting there. Her name was Kazumi, and she was a simultaneous interpreter for Mr. Edward and Jaziawa. So, I switched places, initially booked for Kazumi, and ended up sitting next to the tour conductor from Voice Company. The airplane lifted into the sky, and we talked occasionally. We chatted about spiritual matters in general and many aspects of it. I don't remember exactly what we discussed, but I remember telling him how I got into this and started. I wondered how my life path shifted to change direction towards spiritualism. I know I had better admit that this is my life path. Some may call it destiny. However, part of me wants to let go of so-called spiritualism and live life freely and differently. I still have this quest because I wasn't interested in this before. Other aspects of me changed the course of my life, almost like something interfered with and corrected the path I never imagined or intended. After this 1991 trip to Peru, I became interested in becoming a channel, someone who communicates with invisible beings from higher dimensions or interdimensions for people seeking knowledge from higher realms or galactic civilizations, as Edward does. This occupation requires different human capabilities, like transmediums or psychic mediums. Before the Peru tour, I did not know I was born with abilities or capacities for extrasensory perceptions. Not really. But I have been highly aware of it since I was a child, 3 or 4 years old. As I remember, I was different from other kids in school. I knew somehow I was different from others, including all my family members. My parents, grandparents, brothers, cousins, uncles, and aunts felt like I was a borrowed cat from somewhere else adopted into this family. I know my parents are real. They had me, and I have their biological DNA heritages, but somehow I felt I did not belong with my own family, which still haunts me. I see, take, or think about things differently than most people. I only had ideas about such gifts and ESP matter when I started seeing other psychics with extrasensory perceptions. Beginning. A year before this trip, in early May 1990, I was hospitalized for 3 months for unknown hepatic symptoms. Suddenly, I had a high fever, and my skin turned colors like dirt and dark, purplish blue. The following day, I went to see a doctor and was immediately hospitalized. From that moment, my life path drastically changed its course. Countless blood samples were taken for testing and monitoring. My liver was swollen, the numbers were too high, and they did not go down. If I had Hep A or Hep B, the counts should have decreased over a certain period, but they remained high. The doctors couldn't figure out the cause. Ultimately, they concluded I had an unknown hepatic disease. At that time, hepatitis C had not been discovered yet, but they suspected Hep C would be found soon. So they diagnosed me with non-A, non-B type of hepatitis, which pretty much referred to Hep C. Then they wanted to do a biopsy and cut open my stomach to take living tissue samples from my liver. There were two choices, a spinal tap or a small incision to cut the stomach, then balloon it to perform the biopsy. I was not too fond of the idea of hurting my spinal cord, so I decided on the other option, but it turned into an absolute nightmare. The biopsy needed to be done under local anesthesia because I had to be fully awake during the procedure. I was laid down on the surgical table, the surgical lights were on, both hands and ankles were strapped down, and a panel was set up with diagrams so I could not see the actual operation. The anesthetic was injected next to the navel, and soon after, the doctor made a small incision, maybe a ½ inch. I did not feel anything at that point. Next, air was pumped into my stomach through a thin, clear vinyl tube. My stomach started to balloon slowly, and then a tiny microscope was inserted through the incision to view the liver surface and take living tissue samples from different parts of the liver. As the air ballooned up, the skin started to stretch gradually. After a certain point, I began to feel unbearable pain. I asked the doctors to stop, but they did not. I started calling out for them to stop, but they didn't. They kept saying, almost done, just a little more time. I couldn't understand why they didn't hear me. I looked up at the ceiling and saw other doctors and medical students watching the operation. I realized I was just a test subject for them to gain experience in live biopsies. The pain was intense. I felt my skin separate from the muscles beneath it, tearing apart against my will. I called out and begged them to stop, but they didn't. As I recall, it felt similar to an alien abduction scenario. I could relate to Fox Mulder being abducted and having an unbearable alien biopsy without anesthesia, calling out repeatedly. In massive pain, I became extremely angry at all the doctors and students in the surgical room and above. I was outraged. Soon after, they injected me with a sedative to knock me out. When I regained consciousness a little, I felt so disoriented. I was still on the table, but it was moving. I was being pushed out of the surgical room. My mom was beside me, and then I passed out. I woke up in my room feeling pain, but not as intense. Very early in the morning, the second nightmare started. I woke up with massive pain near my liver. I knew internal bleeding had happened while I was sleeping. It was a serious problem. I called out to the nurses, and the doctor put me on morphine to knock me out again. I was extremely drained from the biopsy for a few days. The doctors came to see me and told me they found nothing. Still no Hep A or Hep B. The head doctor told me they were not prepared for this. Well, your liver numbers are still high and not going down. It is unusual. If your liver dysfunction continues like this, your liver will develop hepatic cirrhosis in 2 to 3 years, leading to liver cancer. Without a liver transplant, you won't survive. You are going to die in the next 4 to 5 years. I said, what? At first, I could not understand what they were saying, and I didn't know how to respond. Am I going to die before the age of 30? Blank. All my plans shattered apart, harshly smashed to dust, and disappeared into thin air. I wanted to vanish from there. I just wanted to withdraw so nobody could see me anymore. You are going to die. It changed everything. I started to feel my body become dense and dull, extremely tired all the time. Sometimes I wanted to get out of the hospital. I dragged my heavy body to a river that ran nearby under the highway, sat on a bench, and cried repeatedly. I ended up staying in the hospital for 3 months, but nothing changed much. The numbers were still high, and I lost my appetite. Everything tasted like nothing. The dullness was unbearable. I was discharged from the hospital because they could not do anything more to treat me. I went back to work, but it wasn't going well. That tiredness and dullness were eating me from the inside. I had to see a doctor daily to receive highly addictive medication with intravenous therapy. In addition to that, I was taking Western medicines and Eastern kanpu, Chinese herbs formulated by a pharma company to treat my condition as prescribed by doctors specializing in liver diseases. I was susceptible to this medication from the beginning. I noticed that when the medicine started to travel through the blood vessels, I could somehow trace it, particularly in the arms, upper arms, mouth and nose, temples, and liver. I noticed the sensation was not only in the vessels, I could also tell when the medication started to spread beneath my skin. The doctor told me the liver is a silent organ, and people usually don't feel anything there, but I did. Tracing the medicine moving through the veins was easier to handle than the overall feeling in the liver. I could tell when synthesized chemicals reached the liver system and spread there. I did not know I had extrasensory perceptions or psychic abilities then. Fighting diseases or physical difficulties is depressing and exhausting, mentally and emotionally challenging, and it can come with many terrifying moments. I started to feel everything going downhill very quickly. When the word death is stamped into your reality, it frightens most people. Nobody wants to die young and so quickly. I did not want to be dead before my mid-30s. It was not my plan at all. Knowing my life would end prematurely was devastating and depressing. The good thing was I still had at least 4 to 5 years. I did not know what death was or what it would be and its meaning. I knew people die when they get old, like in their 70s or 80s. My grandfather and grandmother had passed away, and someday I would die too, but not in my mid-20s. The thought of dying unexpectedly was overwhelming. Death was unknown to me at that point. I felt scared by the news and desperately wanted to understand it. I was raised as a Buddhist and also followed Shinto. In Japanese culture, the idea of reincarnation is very common. Many of us believe there is an afterlife. After physical death, the deceased person's spirit still exists in different realms or spirit worlds, and in many cases, the dead spirit occasionally visits family members. I experienced this when I was 19 years old. When my grandfather, my mom's father, passed away, I was away from home in a different town. He came to see me and appeared beside me in the middle of the night. I was not scared. He said nothing, but a warm feeling surrounded me. I did not know my grandfather had passed away at that moment. My mom told me after I got back home, a day before his funeral. I had such an experience, but my own death did not fit.